Welcome, everybody. My name is Alana Kaivalya, and this is the Modern Mystics podcast. And I have a very, very special guest joining me today. This is Jenni Harris of White Oak Pastures. She is a fifth generation farmer, and her farm, White Oak Pastures, is a regenerative farm. And they've been doing regenerative farming since the 90s, way before it was cool. I'm excited to talk to her today and bring this conversation to you all about what it means to make conscious food choices, have her share with us some of the facts around regenerative farming, and tell us more about White Oak. This place has been deeply embedded in my heart for many years, and I have been working with and ordering from White Oak Pastures for probably 4 or 5 years now. I will never go back. And so it's a real privilege and honor, Jenni, to have you with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I would love to start off with just a little bit of background and context for our audience as to why I really am so excited and pursued having you on the podcast. You know, one of the things that we talk about in yoga and spiritual circles a lot is this idea of compassionate eating or compassionate food choices. And I think that many of us get pigeonholed a little bit into the idea that the only way to eat compassionately is to eat vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for many years. Unfortunately, my health, I have some chronic health issues, didn't allow for that to continue for my body in a healthy way. And so I've been a paleo eater now for probably about a decade and was incredibly grateful to have found White Oak as part of my supportive healing process through food. My doctor very much recommended finding grass-fed organic meat that I could eat that would continue to help me along my healing journey. And you've been such a huge part of that. So I wanted to open that box a little bit for our yogis and spiritual listeners, who maybe think that there's this one way of doing things. There, of course, is never just one way of doing things. There's a million ways of doing things. And I want to educate them about what regenerative farming is and what you do at White Oak. So can you just give us like a basic working definition to start off of what is regenerative farming?
Sure. So, regenerative agriculture to us is farming in a way that works with nature. You don't work really hard to fight against an unstoppable force, which is Mother Nature. We want to replenish the nutrients that we take away. If animals are constantly grazing the soil and then we consume the animals, the earth is the loser. We
Right.
have to do that. We have to farm in a way that puts those nutrients back into the land. So that for us, that's what regenerative agriculture is. It's putting back what we take out and then more.
So it becomes, for lack of a better term, I'm thinking like a zero-sum game that
That's right.
that
Cyclable.
everything, what is that?
Yeah. It's cyclable.
It's
Everything
cyclical.
in nature is a cycle. You've got
Yeah.
the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the energy cycle. It's just applying that same principle, which things are cyclable to agriculture.
And can you tell us just a little bit of the nuts and bolts of how do you actually do that?
Sure. So, my family has been farming in Early County, Georgia, in Bluffton, Georgia, since 1866. And when we think back to the time of my great great grandfather, farming was a very specific way. If you wanted to eat it or wear it or smoke it, you grew it. And that was a really interesting way to live, but it was only interesting to us because, those people didn't know any different.
Right.
My great grandfather continued that way of farming. My grandfather continued it up until about the 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, that was when agriculture was industrialized. And we
Yeah.
talk a lot about this, but the industrialization of meat production is the centralization, the commoditization, uh, of food production. You take animals and centralize it into one area. You feed them something very specific to maximize efficiencies. Animals are slaughtered. And there you've then upped your profit because you were able to do it in an efficient manner.
Right.
And that was the theme of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. My grandfather took the farm in that direction, and my dad who's still very much a major player and decision maker at White Oak Pastures today, continued it. If a little will do a little good, a lot will do a lot of good. So when it came to steroids and antibiotics and chemical fertilizer and pesticides, we're heavy-handed people. And so my dad talks a lot about how his heavy-handedness really showed the unintended consequences of commodity agriculture, sooner than a lot of his, peers. And so in the 90s, my dad started sort of what we call our journey to regenerative agriculture. It was not an overnight change. We've been doing this for over 25 years, and we're still learning, new things, every day. So, that was sort of our evolution to what we're doing now. And it becomes even more interesting with the people that you bring in to run these systems. They bring their own ideas and their own practices, and from their own trials, and it's a lot of fun.
I think it's really interesting to really note that this idea of industrialized agriculture is actually quite recent, that it was such a change and a movement as late as the 50s. I think for many people our age, it's just the way it's always been. We don't realize that there is another way to do things, perhaps, or that as recently as the 50s, there was a different way of doing things. Did your dad, as he was young, did he witness the transition from that original state of farming to the industrialization, or was it already in full swing when he was young?
It was pretty much in full swing. My granddad was born in 1920. Mm-hmm. My dad was born in 54, 55. So it was pretty much really rocking down that industrial path by the time he became an observant, farmhand, really.
Yeah, it really feels like an evolution for not just you as a family, but you as a farm, that you go through this process of thinking that commoditization is the best idea, the newest idea, and then taking a step back and realizing that there's a much more holistic way of doing things. I think that particular evolution, we often mirror or mimic that in our individual lives, don't we? As we grow
Absolutely.
up, we do what we think we should do, and then we start to look around at the world and realize there might be a different and a better way in which we fit into it that fits us on a more holistic level. So I think that's really beautiful. So Jenni, what you do is so important, and it's so beneficial for the earth. You mentioned just before we started recording the podcast, Jenni and I had a little chat, and she was talking to me about the 3 pillars of what her farm really stands for and what it does. I would love for you to share that with us.
Sure. So, excuse me. We talk a lot about 3 different things. We talk about animal welfare, which is, it was sort of the buzzword 10 or 15 years ago that got consumers really focused on the food production system. It was really that first wave of conscious, passionate consumers that understood that you vote with your dollar for things, and it can be a good thing, or it can be a bad thing, or it can be an okay thing. But what changes systems is consumer power. That's what really matters.
Yeah.
And so consumers focused on animal welfare, and today animal welfare is addressed on almost every single label. What a win for consumers, regardless of whether or not it's wholly truthful or not.
Yeah.
What a win. It's something that they, as consumers, said, hey, this is important to me. I demand something to be done with it. Address it, or we won't support you, and they and it's being done now. Another soapbox of mine is the greenwashing that happens in food labeling,
because there's actually no regulation of that. Is that true?
There's actually
it's like the wild west. There's nobody really watching over things or checking in with things.
It's really scary.
It is really scary. My eyes were open to this. I was in a relationship with a person who did food package labeling and was able to really just put anything on these food packages based on what they thought the consumer would want to see. And it was very disheartening to know that even things that are labeled so-called organic or holistic or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Well, and it's so interesting that you say that, because what we have seen, you see it from the consumer, and even a more acute angle because of your relationship with the person who labeled food. But from a farming perspective, it was like we saw this huge resurgence of know your farmer movement. It was deemed the local food movement, because instead of buying food from grocery stores, we were buying it from farmers. What a novel concept.
I know.
We bought food from farmers.
Just like we did 100 years ago, basically yesterday. Yeah.
That's right. And so, that was really great. But then, then we sort of centralized that and formed these certifications, these third-party audits with organic or free range or pasture raised or animal welfare or all these certifications that you could get. And it was like the certifications did exactly what the centralization of agriculture happened the first time. It was like we established a minimum standard at which you produce food. And then if you put in more to that, to go above that standard, you're not able to extract that value out.
Yeah.
And so, we have a love-hate relationship with those certifications. We know that not all of the consumers that want to support us can come here and personally vouch for the production system, that we practice here. But to a certain extent, it sort of feels as though, we're doing, us and farms like us do more and more and more, and these certifications don't address it. So the greenwashing of food products is incredible, and that's a whole nother, we can come back to it. But
that's a really good point, though. And I just want to just quick snapshot something that you said that I think is really critical, is that these certifications, these labels that many people find on foods, they represent the bare minimum of what somebody's supposed to do. I mean, to translate it to my language, to our language for my modern mystics, to be a 200-hour yoga teacher from a 200-hour training, that's literally the bare minimum. And so many people.
200 hours.
Yeah, that's it.
Do 200 hours.
That's it. That's all.
Not important.
That's right. Or 2,000 hours. You're still only registered at a 200-hour. It's like the more education you put in, the more adept you become at your craft. There's actually no additional recognition for that. So I honor you for saying that. And I'd like to share with our listeners how, one of the reasons, there are so many reasons why I've fallen in love with White Oak Pastures, so many reasons. But one of the reasons is that I feel very connected to you. You do a very good job of educating your consumer about what you do. I never knew what the term regenerative farming was until you guys sent a weekly email about it. And you did your little video about it, and you had your dad write something that talked about how important that was. You're very good at educating your consumer, and you definitely go above and beyond that respect to set yourself apart as being really, I think, a leader in this industry and doing things, not just right, but really going above and beyond to be a good steward of the planet.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's consumers like you that create systems like these. Make no mistake. This is not a rich man's hobby. This is a working thing that if we can't sell the bounty of the farm, then we can't do this.
Right.
And so again, you are part of the consumer base that keeps systems like these going. And so that's another big part of it. But going back to the three things that you asked me about initially before I went off on a tangent. Animal welfare was the first one, and that was exciting. The second one is the regenerative land management portion of it. We've talked about that a little bit, but it's putting more back into the soil to replace what we take out of it. So if we're grazing livestock in a very specific way, that works with nature as opposed to against her, and that's really fun, and obviously. There's a lot of validity in these methods. But the third one is the rural revival of towns like Bluffton. Way back in the 1800s, there was no internet, there was no centralized public transportation. It's village living from one village to the next. Our little town of Bluffton was founded in 1815, and there's a lot of stuff that has happened since then that have made urban centers livable. And so we are really proud of the fact that we at White Oak Pastures established a food system, which is one of the grassroots things that you do when you're building a community. You establish a food system. We established a food system, and then because of the food system, we were able to hire good people. So there's about 165 people that work on this farm every day.
Oh, cool.
And those good people then make up a community, and that community is a thriving one. I swore that I would never raise my family in Bluffton, Georgia. When I was growing up, I appreciate.
I know where this is going.
Tell me about it. I mean, I grew up happy to grow up where I was growing up, but always really interested in city urban living. We don't have any neighbors. Our town population is literally 100. When my wife and I had our son, it was 101.
Did they update the sign?
But exactly, yeah, probably. But the idea of raising a family in Bluffton was just not something that was of interest to me. And I moved to Atlanta and realized that living in downtown Atlanta was still not as interesting as what was happening in Bluffton, Georgia.
Yeah.
And so it didn't take but a year of living off the farm to prove to me that, my tail needed to end up in Bluffton. So, the rural revival or the rural resurgence is certainly getting a lot of activity now because of COVID and the pandemic and people being pent up, in their apartments and not able to, do things. Down here in Bluffton, we hardly even knew that there was anything going on. If we didn't watch the news, it's life as normal pretty much.
I might be moving to your farm shortly.
Come on, girl. Be part of the rural resurgence.
I might. Me and my tiny dog getting our feet in the dirt. I've been stuck in New York for the entire pandemic. It's been quite a thing. And,
I can fix that.
Yeah, you really can. You're a problem solver in this case for sure. I do love city living, and I really hear what you're saying. I love that you tried Atlanta. That sounded like a great experiment. There is so much missing, I think, for people in terms of really understanding and knowing and being connected to their food and their food production. I remember, so when I grew up as a kid, I grew up in Denver, Colorado. My grandparents had a home in suburbia, but they actually carved out about a third of their yard. I'm pretty sure it was against the HOA to create a little, what was then essentially an organic farm. My grandfather grew his own cucumbers to make his own dill pickles. He grew his own dill. We had carrots. We had beets. My grandparents were Ukrainian, so we had the beets for our borscht. And that was just always very normal to me growing up. I spent a lot of time with them. And I remember once, probably about 10 years ago, I was teaching a yoga workshop, and I was talking about cucumbers. Actually, there is a Sanskrit chant that refers to a cucumber, and if you don't pick a cucumber before its time, if you just let it fall from the stalk, you can't actually tell which end it was originally attached by. And I was talking about this, and one of my students raised their hand and said, "I've never seen a cucumber growing. I didn't know that it grew on a stalk." And it never occurred to me that so many people are so far removed from how food is even produced, what it even looks like before it gets to the grocery store, before it gets put in a can, before it gets frozen in a bag. Because of our city centers, our urban living, we just don't have that really tactile experience, that living experience. I mean, I didn't eat a store-bought tomato until I was 21 years old. And, having tasted a really homegrown tomato and then having to eat the store-bought, it's like the difference is night and day. And I know you know this, but you provide so many opportunities for people to come to your farm. They can come visit, right? They can stay over. You have little cabins that they can hang out at. So you're really doing a good job of reconnecting people to what their food actually is and how they nourish themselves.
Well, and I want to add on that, if it's okay,
Yeah, of course.
to what you said. Part of what happened in food labeling and the greenwashing of food and marketing in general happened because people became disconnected from their food source.
Yeah.
If
Yep.
consumers had known the awful conditions that animals lived
Hmm.
in those commodity factory farms, they never
They never
would
would
have
have
said that
tolerated.
was okay.
No, they
They
never would have
never
accepted it.
they
Absolutely.
never would have accepted it. But because of the trickery that happens and people's obsession with being removed from their food source, bad things happen. My dad always said, if you don't manage your business, you won't have no damn business. And I believe that to be true.
Dad's
And
got some great sayings, by the way.
he does. But it's true. People stopped managing that part of their life,
Yeah.
and shockingly, it's now been mismanaged.
Right.
You can't allow people to have your best interest in mind, because people won't have your best interest in mind. And that
Absolutely.
it's so much easier to take a vitamin or take a pill,
Yeah.
or get those nutrients from a milkshake or a whatever, than to focus on the fact that this was an animal and it was treated in a certain way and it
Yeah.
had a certain purpose, and now this is my end of the deal, which is consuming it in a responsible way.
Right. Well, I think there are some generational shifts too that we've seen. We talked a little bit about the fact that this industrialized farming movement happened in the 50s and 60s. Well, a lot of similar types of things happened in the 50s and 60s where we were making huge advances in science. We were going to the moon. We were, creating a lot of drugs to make life, better living through chemistry, that kind of thing. And everybody was just so excited about this shiny new stuff, and we didn't have the longevity to be able to see how actually damaging it was to have some of these shiny new things. I think we're coming back around a little bit to being able to look back at some of these ideas, and sure, some of them have some benefit, but ultimately staying more connected to the earth and the planet is a much better way to go. And I want to talk a little bit more, Jenni, if you don't mind, about the animal welfare piece, because I think that that's probably going to be very heavy on the minds of my yogi listeners, my spiritual listeners. I know that that was a huge piece of why I initially went vegetarian. I just thought that was the only right way to participate in compassionate consumption of food. Just, stop eating meat. It's the best thing for everybody. That's how I can make my stand essentially as a social activist, right? To make this choice and make this sacrifice. And as I mentioned earlier, I actually have some chronic health issues where long term, I just can't. It's just not something I can do. So, in lieu of being a vegetarian, I have made the best choices I can, which is sourcing my meat and actually some vegetables. I've got some tomatoes coming from you this week, by the way. Yay, can't wait. Um, Sourcing anything I can from a farm like yours. Obviously, I live in New York City. I can't go down the street, right? So I have it come from you. But let's talk a little bit about the animal welfare piece. So tell me about your animals on your farm. How do they live? What are their lives like?
Sure. So, to be an animal at White Oak Pastures is a pretty awesome thing. We learn about words in marketing. I'm the director of marketing, which is why I always take this back to marketing, because it's what sits with me. It's what applies to me. But words like free range. Well,
Yeah.
did you know that free range poultry live in a house
Yes, they are not free at
with?
all.
That's right.
Isn't
So
it 12 inches by 12 inches?
it's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
A door,
Yeah.
on one side where they might go out on a concrete pad or they might not,
Hmm.
so it's, we choose to call all of our livestock pasture raised. And
Hmm.
that to us means outdoors 24/7.
Wait, they're actually in a pasture?
Really? Well, they can't impact the land if they're not.
Yeah,
But,
right.
we think about, my dad talks a lot about prescribed grazing, and animals are tools to accomplish specific landscapes. So
Huh.
we've bought a decent amount of land over the last 10 years, and instead of bringing in big, heavy yellow equipment to open up the woods, we put in a herd of goats or a herd of sheep or a
Oh,
herd
wow.
of hogs to open those woods up. And so we don't even really talk about the lifestyle of the animals. We talk a lot about the purpose of the animal. You know, they have a purpose,
Yeah.
and it is to positively impact the landscape, and that is to maintain pasture, to restore the forest, you know, to do these very specific things. And by the grace of God, they've got these wonderful tools to do it. You know, pigs were born to root and wallow. Well, look at their nose, guys. It looks like a shovel. That's what
Yeah.
they do. They root and wallow. You know, cows were born to roam and to graze. Chickens were born to peck and to scratch. You know, look at their faces. You know, it's all about how they can use their tools to
Yeah.
impact land.
Huh.
And so when we talk about animal welfare, we talk you know, about them being outdoors 24/7, where they can positively impact the landscape. And in doing so, they're able to naturally express their instinctive behavior, the behaviors that they evolved doing, which we believe is a pretty good life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love seeing the videos of, you know, well, there was so weekly you send out some videos to some of your members of White Oak
Mm-hmm.
Pastures, and I think last week or the week before it was a video of your small ruminants, and
Yep.
they were being, you know, moved into another pasture, and there was this moment where, I'm not kidding, it brought tears to my eyes, where the dog was hurting them, and then the camera sort of shifted to reveal the expanse, the huge amount of land that they
Yep.
then just sort of opened up and ran into. And it's like, God, you know, you guys are really putting, you know, your heart into all this work. It's quite moving to see the animals really doing their job. I like that you talked about the animals have a purpose. You know, we talk about that a lot too, that we're here always to fulfill our purpose, and you're allowing the cows to fulfill their purpose. You're allowing the chickens to fulfill their purpose. And, you know, Jenni, you and your family have a pretty high purpose. You're really on the forefront of this regenerative farming, and you're really giving people back this connection to the land and the food, which is so basic and so important. So it's incredible work that you're doing, and I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You know, it's a privilege to do it. We talk a lot and we describe it as radically traditional farming. We're not doing anything that my great great grandfather didn't do. You know,
Right.
sure, now there's the USDA and the Department of Transportation, and you know, these other, you know, regulatory bodies that you know, govern things a little differently, but you know, everything we're doing is as basic as my great great grandfather. You know,
Yeah.
we are one step above hunter gatherer. You know,
Right.
we are using animals as tools to impact land and giving consumers a way to move that forward, so that there can be more, not less.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, I'm going to want all my listeners to go check out your website, whiteoakpastures.com. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things they can find on your website, because they're not just going to find their grass-fed ground beef. I actually have been feeding my small dog Roxy your pet grind, I think, for about 5 years, which is pretty amazing. She's completely raw and White Oak Pastures based, so you've got things for the pets there. I know it's honestly, let me tell you a little. This is my slight tangent. So I had been feeding her raw when I first got her as a baby, and then I got lazy. You know, and I found very high quality, but little brown, crunchy kibbles. And I did that for a few years. And then I went back because I had found the pet grind at White Oak Pastures, and I started feeding her the pet grind again. And I'm not kidding you, the gray hair on her face went away. She was never
I need
fat.
some.
I
I need
know,
some.
right? And she was never fat, but suddenly she was muscular and her
Wow.
coat became shiny, and it's like she got all this vitality back. So, you know, we'll never go back again. We love the pet grind. I order all my meat from White Oak Pastures. You've also got vegetables this summer.
Yep. So that's really exciting. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We feel strongly about honoring the animals that we slaughter. You know,
Yes.
it's not enough to give them a good life on pasture.
Yeah.
As business people and as farmers, it's up to us to find ways to utilize all of the animal. It's not fair to slaughter an animal and, as a picky American eater, only eat the fillet and the ribeye and the New York strips. That's just that's not right.
Yeah.
So what we find ourselves doing is trying to balance the carcass. If when we slaughter an animal, obviously the meat is sold for consumption, but we also take things like the hides and turn them into leather bags and rugs. We take the fat and render it down to make our own soaps and candles. We take noses and ears and tracheas and esophaguses and turn them into pet chews.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever is not able to be sold as one of those consumer products, we compost. We believe strongly in our composting system that those inedible parts of the carcass, if treated correctly, in 2 years are a wonderful soil amendment for pasture. So,
that's cool.
It is. It's a really aggressive program. It's something that we're really proud of, and we have increased the organic matter in our soil tremendously. From our composting.
What a way to honor life, Jenni. That's so cool.
I hope that I'm honored in that same way when I die.
I'd like to be on that list.
Me too. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's really amazing. That is really, really special. So let's send all of my listeners to whiteoakpastures.com. Is there any other way in which listeners can support you or, learn more about you or find you?
We have some pretty modest efforts on social media. We're farmers. We're not really good at that sort of stuff. But I think that letting agriculture be a conversation. If your listeners have questions, whether it's reaching out on our website or social media, I think having just the conversation. It's not all about how you can support White Oak Pastures or farms like White Oak Pastures. It's how can you better understand the impact you have while you're here on this earth? Supporting farms like ours help move the regenerative, humane, food animal industry. Sure, absolutely. But the truth is, how can you be a more intentional person to support people like the hardworking people of White Oak Pastures or another farm? There's dozens of people doing exactly what we're doing all over the United States. So it's using your voice to help promote those.
I love that. And you have a YouTube channel, right? Where people can
we
see
do.
some.
It's new. It's those videos that you're talking about. We hired a really great power couple, and Risa does an excellent job. So I'm glad you like them.
I do. I wait for them every week. I love them. There was we had the small ruminants, and then we had the vegetables, the organic vegetables.
That's exactly right.
I love it. Well, Jenni, thank you.
Either turkeys or cattle are coming up next week, so get ready.
I can't wait. I'm gonna pull up my chair and get ready.
That's right.
Jenni, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I so appreciate the discussion, and I really appreciate all the work that you do. And thanks for coming on and educating our listeners about the importance of being reconnected to the earth and to their food.
Thank you for using your platform to help promote this. It's all a cycle, and farmers can only do so much. It then becomes the consumer's turn. And so it's all part of that cycle. So thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.